The bell rang and the hallway of Lincoln High erupted into chaos, backpacks slamming into lockers, sneakers squeaking on polished floors, laughter bouncing off the walls. But in the middle of it all, Jake Mitchell moved like a shadow. Head down, shoulders hunched, his faded hoodie swallowing him whole. He was used to being invisible. At least that's what he thought. Across the cafeteria, Lucas Carter held court, his Letterman jacket draped over his shoulders like a crown. His friends hung on every word, laughing too loud at jokes that weren't funny. Then Lucas's eyes landed on Jake and his smirk sharpened. "Check it out," he muttered, nudging his buddy. "Trash bag Mitchell strikes again." Jake felt the stares before he heard the words, a snicker here, a whisper there. His grip tightened around his tray, knuckles whitening. He could ignore it, he always did. But today Lucas wasn't satisfied with just looks. He swaggered over, blocking Jake's path. "Seriously, man," Lucas said, flicking the frayed edge of Jake's sleeve. "Does your dad even own an iron?" The laughter hit like a punch to the gut. Somewhere in the back of the room, Mr. Harris sighed, rubbing his temples. He'd seen this play out too many times. But before he could step in, the bell cut through the noise. The moment dissolved. Jake ducked past Lucas, his face burning, his chest tight. Just another day, just another humiliation. But what Lucas didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Jake's dad wasn't just some nobody. And by this time tomorrow, that truth would roar into the school parking lot in a jet-black Lamborghini, leaving every single one of them speechless. The final bell released students into the afternoon like a burst dam. Jake moved quickly, head low, hoping to vanish into the stream of backpacks and chatter. But fate, or rather, Lucas had other plans. A sharp shove between his shoulder blades sent him stumbling into a locker with a metallic clang. "Oops," Lucas drawled, his grin all teeth. "Guess trash doesn't know how to stand upright." Jake's books lay scattered at his feet like broken wings. Around them, students slowed their pace, some snickering behind hands, others pretending not to see. This was the unspoken rule of Lincoln High. When Lucas Carter decided to make you his entertainment, you suffered alone. "Come on, Mitchell," Lucas goaded, nudging Jake's math textbook with his pristine sneaker. "Tell us again how your dad's gonna buy you new clothes." "Oh, wait." His friend's laughter was a physical thing, pressing Jake harder against the cold metal locker. Then came the moment that changed everything. As Jake reached for his notebook, Lucas brought his foot down hard, the crunch of paper echoing in the suddenly quiet hallway. Something inside Jake snapped. "You're gonna regret that," Jake said, his voice barely above a whisper but carrying an edge no one had ever heard before. Lucas blinked, then threw his head back laughing. "Oh, this I gotta hear. What's Trash Boy gonna do?" Cry to his. The punch landed square on Lucas's jaw, cutting off his words with a satisfying crack. For one glorious second, Lucas looked genuinely shocked, his hand flying to his face. Then the world exploded into shouting and grabbing hands as teachers came running. In Principal Higgins' office, the story twisted like a knife. "He attacked me out of nowhere," Lucas whined, the perfect picture of wounded innocence with his ice pack and trembling lip. The principal's eyes slid right over Jake's split knuckles, the torn sleeve where Lucas had grabbed him. "Mr. Mitchell," Higgins sighed, rubbing his temples, "we have a zero-tolerance policy for violence. You're suspended for 3 days." The gavel of injustice fell with finality. Behind the principal's back, Lucas flashed Jake a triumphant smirk. As Jake shouldered his battered backpack for the long walk home, the whispers followed him like ghosts. "Psycho, loser, no wonder his mom left." Each one landed like a stone in his gut. But beneath the shame, something new burned in Jake's chest, a spark of defiance that not even Lincoln High's hallowed halls could extinguish. Little did they know, this wasn't the end of Jake Mitchell's story. It was only the beginning. Because while Lucas Carter might have won this battle, the war was about to take a turn nobody saw coming, least of all the Golden Boy himself. The walk home felt longer than usual, each step heavy with the weight of what had happened. Jake kicked a pebble down the cracked sidewalk, replaying the moment his fist connected with Lucas's jaw. Part of him regretted it, not because Lucas didn't deserve it, but because now his dad would have to know. And David Mitchell had enough on his plate without his son getting suspended. Their apartment was small, just 2 bedrooms, a cramped kitchen, and a couch that sagged in the middle. But it was clean, always clean, because his dad insisted on that much. Jake found him at the kitchen table, sorting through bills with that familiar crease between his eyebrows. When David looked up, Jake didn't even have to say anything. "Let me guess," his dad said, setting down the stack of envelopes. "Lucas Carter." Jake dropped his backpack on the floor with a thud. He started it. David sighed, rubbing his temples the exact same way Mr. Harris had earlier. And you finished it. Jake opened his mouth to argue, but the words died in his throat. His dad wasn't mad, just tired. Tired of the same fights, the same struggles, the same look on Jake's face every time he came home defeated. You know why we don't react, Jake, David said quietly. We're better than that. But that was the thing. Jake wasn't sure he believed that anymore. Being better hadn't stopped Lucas. Being better hadn't stopped the whispers. Being better just meant taking it over and over until you disappeared into the background of your own life. That night, lying in bed, Jake stared at the ceiling and listened to the muffled sound of his dad on the phone in the other room. "No, I'm not letting this go," David muttered, voice low but sharp. "Not this time." Jake had heard that tone before, years ago, when his mom left. Back when David still wore suits to work, back when they lived in a house with a yard instead of this tiny apartment, back when his dad was someone people listened to. He rolled over, pressing his face into the pillow. That version of his dad felt like a story, something from another life. The David Mitchell he knew now drove a 10-year-old sedan and worked late shifts at the auto shop. The David Mitchell he knew now folded his socks twice because the elastic was wearing out. But as Jake drifted off to sleep, one thought nagged at him, that look in his dad's eyes when he'd hung up the phone. It wasn't defeat. It was strategy. The suspension stretched before Jake like a prison sentence. 3 days trapped in the apartment while Lucas Carter held court at school, no doubt spinning the story to make himself the victim. Jake's knuckles still ached when he flexed his hand, a constant reminder of that single moment of rebellion. Wednesday morning found him pacing the tiny kitchen when the landline rang. His dad answered on the second ring, his hello sharp with concern. Then his voice changed. "Principal Higgins, to what do I owe this unexpected call?" Jake froze mid-step. The principal never called parents, not unless it was really bad. He crept closer as his dad's grip whitened around the phone. "I see," David said, voice dangerously calm. "So let me understand this correctly. My son gets physically harassed for months, finally defends himself once, and you suspend him while the instigator faces no consequences." A pause. "Because the Carters donate to the football program." How? Enlightening. Jake's stomach dropped. He'd never heard his dad use that tone like ice cracking over a deep lake. Principal Higgins' muffled voice squawked through the receiver, but David cut him off. "No, I believe we're done here, but rest assured this conversation isn't over." The phone clicked down with finality. For a long moment David just stared at the wall, jaw working. Then he turned to Jake with an expression that sent chills down his spine. "Get dressed. We're going to school." "But I'm suspended." "Not anymore." David was already shrugging into his one good jacket, the navy blue one he kept for job interviews. "Grab your backpack." The ride to Lincoln High passed in tense silence. Jake studied his dad's profile, the set of his shoulders, the way his fingers drummed a military rhythm on the steering wheel. This wasn't the tired auto mechanic who came home smelling of grease. This was someone else entirely. When they pulled into the packed student lot, Jake expected his dad to head straight for the office. Instead, David parked right beside Lucas's shiny new BMW, killed the engine, and turned to Jake. "Listen carefully. No matter what happens in there, you hold your head high. You've done nothing wrong." As they walked through the crowded halls, whispers followed like a wake. Kids nudged each other, eyes wide. Someone snapped a picture. By the time they reached Principal Higgins' office, a small crowd had gathered. The principal looked up from his desk, face flushing. "Mr. Mitchell, I told you." "You told me many things," David interrupted. "Now it's my turn." He reached into his inner jacket pocket and produced a business card, sliding it across the desk like a chess move. "Recognize this." Higgins paled. The card bore a simple logo, Mitchell Tech Solutions. CEO. Jake's breath caught. He hadn't seen that logo since he was 12. "Turns out your biggest donor isn't the Carters after all," David continued, voice quiet but carrying. "That would be my company's education foundation, which I'll be dissolving immediately unless my son receives a public apology from Lucas Carter and this suspension disappears from his record." The office door creaked open. Lucas stood frozen in the doorway, ice pack still theatrically pressed to his jaw. His eyes darted between Jake and the business card, realization dawning. Principal Higgins swallowed hard. "Mr. Mitchell, perhaps we can." "No perhaps," David stood, straightening his jacket with deliberate calm. You have until end of day to decide whose money you value more. He turned to Lucas, and for the first time the bully actually flinched. As for you, touch my son again and I'll buy your father's dealership just to fire him. The walk back through the silent halls felt like a dream. Jake kept waiting to wake up, but his dad's hand on his shoulder was solid and real. They were almost to the exit when Lucas's voice rang out behind them, cracking with desperation. Mitchell, you think this changes anything? You're still just. David didn't even turn around. Watch the news tonight, Lucas, then we'll talk. The ride home was silent except for the rhythmic tap of David's fingers on the steering wheel. Jake stared at his father's profile, seeing him properly for the first time in years. The sharp cut of his jawline, the way his eyes missed nothing. This wasn't the exhausted mechanic who fell asleep on the couch most nights. This was the man from before. Mitchell Tech Solution, Jake finally asked, the words cracking like thin ice. David exhaled through his nose, kept the naming rights in the buyout agreement. He turned down their street, the familiar potholes jostling them in their seats. Should have told you sooner. The apartment felt different when they stepped inside, smaller somehow, like the walls couldn't contain what they now knew. David moved to the fridge, pulling out 2 sodas with a wry smile. Suspension's over, might as well celebrate. Jake caught the can automatically, his mind racing. You're really. Was, David corrected, popping his tab. Sold it 5 years ago when your mom, he trailed off, taking a long drink. Point is, the money's been sitting in trusts, didn't touch it except for tuition and emergencies. His eyes flicked to Jake's bruised knuckles. This qualifies. The revelation settled between them like snowfall. Jake thought of all the hand-me-down clothes, the packed lunches, the way his dad had taught him to darn socks instead of buying new ones. Not because they couldn't afford it, because David Mitchell remembered what it was to earn things. Jake's phone buzzed violently in his pocket. Group chats he'd never been included in were suddenly blowing up with messages. Dude, WTF, your dad owns half the tech park. Lucas is freaking. Check the news. David's landline rang again. This time he let it go to voicemail. The machine clicked on. Mr. Mitchell, this is Superintendent Graves, about today's unfortunate misunderstanding. David muted the speaker with a practiced flick. They'll call all night. He leaned forward, elbows on knees. Here's what happens next. Lucas apologizes publicly tomorrow. The suspension disappears. And you? He fixed Jake with a look that pinned him in place. You walk in there with your head high, but you don't gloat. Understood. Jake nodded, his throat tight. What about everything else? That's up to you, David gestured around their modest apartment. We could move, new school, fresh start, or, his mouth quirked, we could stay, see how this plays out. Outside, car doors slammed. Through the thin curtains, Jake saw news vans lining their street. Someone shouted questions at their building. David sighed and reached for his jacket again. Change of plans, he said, tossing Jake his hoodie. We're going out the back, got something to show you. The alley behind their building smelled of wet pavement and Chinese takeout. David led them to a nondescript parking garage a block over, his keys jingling in the pre-dawn quiet. On the 3rd level, he stopped before a car covered by a fitted tarp. With a flourish, he pulled the cover away. The Lamborghini gleamed under the fluorescent lights like something from a dream, all sleek angles and predatory stillness. Jet black, custom plates reading MITCHEL1. Jake's breath left him in a rush. This is yours. Ours, David corrected, running a hand along the hood with quiet pride. Bought it the week after the sale. Been keeping it in storage until, he met Jake's eyes, until we were ready. The pieces clicked together with sudden, breathtaking clarity. The overtime at the shop, the errands that took hours. All this time, his father had been protecting more than just money. He'd been protecting Jake from becoming exactly what Lucas was. David tossed him the keys. Thought you might want to drive to school tomorrow. Jake caught them by pure reflex, his whole world tilting on its axis. In that moment he understood this wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about the car. It was about finally being seen. The cameras were waiting when they pulled up to school the next morning. The morning sun glinted off the Lamborghini's black paint as Jake guided it through the school gates, his fingers tight around the steering wheel. Every head turned. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the teachers lingering by the entrance froze, coffee cups halfway to their lips. David sat calmly in the passenger seat, sunglasses hiding his eyes. "Remember," he said, head high, but no gloating. Jake nodded, his pulse hammering. He killed the engine, and the sudden silence felt louder than the engine's growl. For a second, no one moved. Then, like a dam breaking, the whispers started. "Is that Jake Mitchell?" "No way, no freaking way." "Dude, that's a Lamborghini Aventador. That's like $500,000. Jake stepped out, the weight of every stare pressing down on him. He didn't look for Lucas, not yet. He just adjusted his backpack and walked toward the entrance like it was any other day. But then came the voice he'd been waiting for. "Mitchell." Lucas stood at the top of the steps, his usual smirk replaced by something raw and unreadable. His eyes flicked from Jake to the car and back again, his jaw working. "What the hell is this?" Jake didn't answer. He didn't have to. Because David Mitchell stepped out of the passenger side then, and the crowd parted like he was royalty. He didn't raise his voice, didn't glare, just looked at Lucas with the quiet, terrifying calm of a man who'd already won. "Lucas Carter," David said, "we need to talk." Lucas swallowed hard. His friends, usually so quick to laugh, had gone silent. Principal Higgins appeared in the doorway, his face pale. "Mr. Mitchell, perhaps we should." "No," David cut in. "Right here is fine." He turned back to Lucas. "You've spent months making my son's life miserable because of what he wears, because of what you assumed about him, about us." He paused, letting the words sink in. "So tell me, Lucas, how does it feel to be the one judged for once?" The courtyard was dead silent. Even the birds seemed to stop chirping. Lucas opened his mouth, then closed it. His eyes darted to Jake, and for the first time there was no mockery there, just something like fear. Lucas started, then stopped, his shoulders slumped. "I'm sorry." The words hung in the air, fragile and unbelievable. Jake had imagined this moment 100 times, dreamed of Lucas humiliated, groveling, finally getting what he deserved. But now that it was here, it didn't feel like victory. It just felt over. David studied Lucas for a long moment, then nodded. "Good enough." He turned to Principal Higgins. "The suspension is lifted." Higgins nodded quickly. "Of course, and Lucas will be serving detention for." "No," Jake said suddenly. Everyone looked at him. "No detention," Jake said, meeting Lucas's eyes. "Just stop, that's all." Lucas stared at him, then gave a single stiff nod. David clapped a hand on Jake's shoulder. "Let's go." They walked back to the car together, the crowd still staring. Jake slid into the driver's seat, his hands steady now. As they pulled away, he glanced in the rearview mirror. Lucas was still standing there, watching them go. And for the first time in years, Jake Mitchell didn't feel invisible. He felt free. The school buzzed for weeks. Overnight, Jake Mitchell went from being the kid nobody noticed to the one everyone whispered about. But the strangest part, the whispers weren't cruel anymore. They were curious, almost reverent. Lucas avoided him entirely. No more shoves in the hallway, no snide remarks. Just quick, tense nods when they passed, like an unspoken truce. His football buddies, once so eager to join in the torment, now eyed Jake with something close to wariness. Mr. Harris was the first teacher to say it outright. Pulling Jake aside after class one day, he smirked. "Knew there was more to you, Mitchell." He tapped his temple. "Quiet ones always have the best stories." At home, things changed too. The landline stopped ringing with apologies from the school board. Instead, it was job offers for David, consulting gigs, tech startups begging for his expertise. He turned them all down. "Got everything I need right here," he'd say, ruffling Jake's hair like he was still 12. But the real shift happened in the way Jake carried himself. Shoulders back, chin up. No more hugging the lockers like they could swallow him whole. He even wore his old hoodie again, the one Lucas had mocked, just to prove it didn't matter anymore. And then there was Mia Chen. She'd been a background character in Jake's life, one of the smart, quiet kids who floated between social circles without ever really belonging to any. But the Monday after the Lamborghini incident, she slid into the seat next to him at lunch. "So," she said, unwrapping her sandwich like this was completely normal, "you gonna let Lucas off that easy?" Jake blinked. "What?" Mia shrugged. "Guy made your life hell for a year. All he had to do was say 2 words. She took a bite, studying him. "You're nicer than I would have been." Jake surprised himself by laughing. "Yeah, well, my dad says holding grudges is like drinking poison and waiting for the other person to die." Mia grinned. Your dad sounds smart. She nudged her chocolate milk toward him. Also sounds like he could buy the school if he wanted, just saying. For the first time in forever, lunch didn't feel like a prison sentence. That afternoon, as Jake climbed into the Lamborghini, still surreal, still heart-thumping, David raised an eyebrow. Who's the girl? Jake felt his ears burn. How do you? Parental ESB, David deadpan, shifting gears. Also, she waved at me. Nice kid. They drove in comfortable silence for a while before David spoke again, quieter this time. You handled it well, you know. Better than I would have at your age. Jake stared out the window, watching the school shrink in the side mirror. Just didn't see the point in kicking him when he was down. David smiled, one of those rare, real ones. That's the difference between us and people like Lucas, Jake. We remember what it's like to have nothing. He patted the dashboard. And that's why we'll never lose ourselves, no matter how many of these we own. The lesson settled deep in Jake's bones, more valuable than any car. As they turned onto their street, Jake finally asked the question that had been gnawing at him. So, we keeping the apartment? David laughed loud and sudden. Hell no, but we're taking the couch. And just like that, the last piece of Jake's old life clicked into place, not as something to escape from, but as the foundation for whatever came next. The news vans disappeared after a week. The memes lasted a little longer, photoshopped images of Jake's face on billionaire CEOs, Lucas crying in the Lamborghini's rearview mirror. But by the time summer rolled around, Lincoln High moved on to newer dramas. Jake kept wearing the hoodie. Some things didn't change. He still hated math, still burned his toast every morning, still caught David staring at his old Mitchell Tech business cards sometimes, that faraway look in his eyes. But now, when Jake walked down the hallways, people met his gaze. Some even smiled. Mia became a permanent fixture at his lunch table. She never asked about the money, just stole his fries and argued with him about superhero movies. It was normal, better than normal actually. As for Lucas, rumor had it his parents pulled him out of Lincoln High at the end of the semester. Too much negative attention. The poetic justice wasn't lost on Jake. One afternoon, as he and David packed up their apartment, they'd bought a house. Not a mansion, just a nice place with a yard. Jake found a box of old photos. There was his dad, younger, sharper-suited, shaking hands with people on magazine covers. There was Jake himself at 8 years old, grinning in a private school uniform he barely remembered. Why didn't you tell me, Jake asked, tracing the faded edges, about all of it? David sat beside him, dust coating his fingers. Would you have believed me? Jake thought about it. No. Exactly. David ruffled his hair like he used to when Jake was small. Some lessons you've got to learn the hard way. And maybe that was the real gift, not the car, not the sudden respect, but the understanding that flashed between them now. That they'd survive the worst of it together. The last day of school, Jake drove the Lamborghini one final time. Mia whooped as she slid into the passenger seat, her graduation cap askew. Still can't believe you're the secret rich kid, she laughed. Jake grinned, shifting gears. Believe it. As they pulled away from Lincoln High for the last time, Jake glanced in the rearview mirror. The building looked smaller somehow, less imposing, just bricks and glass, no longer a battleground. Somewhere ahead, the future waited, wide open and gleaming like the road before them.